Let's start then. Sorry?
I was asking if we're filming. If we need to turn the camera.
Are we filming? I assume so.
We are.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I don't believe there are any apologies for absence. Any declarations of interest? No. Minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of January, you've all read them. Can I sign them as a true and accurate record?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you. Hold on, I'll just sign them. Done. And let us go on to A4, the Chief Executive's report on organisational culture and management practices. Bye.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And several months ago at this committee, members asked, particularly I think, about the issue of the then issue of remote working, and the fact, I think we were at that time, I think it was about September, we were discussing the pace at which staff were returning to work. And of course, since then, there's been the Omicron wave, and the Plan B was in place until a couple of weeks ago, just after I'd completed this report, or just at the time I was completing this report. And I thought that it was important because there was questions raised by members about the nature of staff working, and because of the statutory responsibilities of head of paid service about advising on staff organisation, I felt an obligation to write something about this rather than just to rely continually on interpretation of guidance from government. But the other issues, of course, are the two peer reviews that we've had over the last 2 years. One was the Corporate Peer Challenge, which actually was conducted the very week of the very week I called COVID, but it was also the 2 weeks before lockdown itself. It was about the 11th of March, I think we actually were concluded, which meant that their report couldn't be completed until August later that year. And then we were, as an authority, responding completely to the COVID demands, and so we never actually responded to the Corporate Peer Challenge. And I thought it was important that it was on record here, and it was on record what they recommended and what how we responded to their recommendations. And then, of course, more recently, and concluded in January indeed, was another peer review, this time on equalities, and the Council's approach to equalities, diversity and inclusion. And I thought we ought really to have that here as well. And to make a whole compendium of this, I decided that because Stuart Love and I, the Chief Executive of Westminster, we had reviewed the shared functions and shared services, and we reviewed really, not because we had major concerns about them, we were concerned about the cost efficacy, I have to say, of our digital, of our information technology arrangements. And we've agreed to separate elements of those. But I felt that we really ought to have a descriptive account for the whole council, for both councils indeed, about the nature of that sharing and the fact that we need to go forward in a much more granular way, looking at costs and accountability, but also agreeing an overall strategic alliance between ourselves and Westminster. Because of the benefits that the PwC report suggests. And so the report you have before you is for 14 pages, and that describes the totality of this. 12 pages, 1 to 12, describes is the report itself, and then there's I apologise for doing 1.5 pages of footnotes, but I'm afraid I do try and derive assertions that I make. And then, of course, there's the appendices, which goes into the issues more broadly. And really, it is entirely, as I say, in the report, largely based on description, but the recommendations on paragraph 7 are not for decision making. They're actually so that we advise you what it is that we're doing, and you may say, well, actually we're not sure about this, and question about that. But I did think it was important that these issues were brought to your attention about the importance for us to developing a workforce plan with our staff, and actually we setting out in the document the advantages of working together in the same place. And so the advantages of office-based or workplace-based working. And I think that that's the intention of the report, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Barry. Any questions? Any comments? David?
Barry, in your notes, on note 6 on page 13, you give a high-level breakdown of the average age and some of the other relevant indices of staff. How well are we doing in terms of staff from a minority or ethnic background at the higher levels of being officers? Because you don't break that down.
Well, I don't break it down because it's, but I can say now that of the senior groups, it's been good in the last 2 years. I think last 2 to 3 years. By good, I mean above what the appointment was prior to that. Because prior to that, we would say that actually and I have to say that the black, Asian, minority ethnic, that breakdown of staff is not the same as the black, Asian, minority ethnic breakdown of residents. Because the residents, the diversity indices in Kensington, Chelsea is different than the diversity indices across London, and we're of course recruiting people across London. So I'm not complacent in the fact that this is an improvement in the black, Asian, minority ethnic hiring of senior staff, but it's not throughout the organisation, and we're also looking, we've got numbers of the staff who've left as well. So staff that leave and staff that join, and therefore we know what it's a rising trend amongst senior staff. But we're not complacent, because one of the big issues we have to look at, I think, is the recruitment of local staff. By local, I don't mean only living in Kensington and Chelsea, because we're a narrow cylinder, and if you only did it for people living in Kensington and Chelsea, you'd be probably crowding out the people that live closer to the town hall than those people that live in the north and the south, for example. So we need to take a non-territorial approach to local, but I do mean people that live locally to the council. And we need to improve on that, and we have done quite a bit on that in relation to apprenticeships and employment, and I know that Debbie Morris, the Director of HR and ODs here, can answer the details of that. But generally, I'd say we've certainly improved at the senior level, and at the level below that, we've made some improvement, not great. We've got numbers on that we can report to you, but you'd need to look at the leavers and the joiners. And you'd need to be mindful of the fact that this isn't not necessarily a proxy for local.
Thank you, Barry. I thought it's a really good report. This might be a bit of a silly question, but I mean, obviously we had one of our staff conferences last week, and we had over 200 people on Teams, which is fantastic. So a lot more than we would have done maybe if we'd been all together. But obviously we still have the the yellow hand going up, so it's not a great way of giving an atmosphere in terms of camaraderie. So I think my question is that when we do evaluation of contracts, we've set ourselves a 70-30 split between cost and quality. When it comes to thinking about staff and retaining staff, where would we set that dial between providing a service and staff benefit? Would it be 70-30, 50-50, or should it be all about staff service, but then a lower level in terms of obviously the benefits as far as the employees are concerned.
The staff are only employed to provide service. If there's a conflict between the interests of staff, the interests of service, service comes first, there's no question. And so I did the staff conference, I had 775 people last week, and I felt it was very fragmented and atomised because it was very difficult for people to engage when there's 700. You can't really do that. And we're looking through how we better engage with these tools that we've got, and there are ways of doing it, and we're examining at the moment how we can do mass engagement with staff and still have participation involvement. But if your question is principally about how do we calibrate the interests of staff, the interests of service, people are we invest in our staff because they are means towards the ends, which is delivering service to the public. We're not in the business of just employing people. But if people, and I think that the other point about local government is that we are, the hints in the title, we are local government. And therefore people who are employed by us providing services to us, to the public that's here, they could be providing back office service, but still they have to have connection with the borough in order to understand the communities that they serve, the service users that they serve, and the general public, as well as yourself as members, I have to say. That can't be done from, by offshoring or onshoring up north or somewhere. It's got to be done by people that are in London or in, that can get here. And I think that our big issue for us is really and I think this is an issue for all of the central London large employers, well, it's certainly a case with the NHS, it's a case with our other central London authorities like Camden and Westminster and the City of London, that it is about making sure that we are an engaging, welcoming, inclusive place for staff that enables them to develop their skills and provide their talents and dedication to us. But ultimately, this is, when it's not 70-30, it's 100-0. Service to the public is the thing that comes first, without question.
Thank you. Monica.
Thank you. I also found this a really helpful report. Thank you. My question, you talk throughout the report about staff and union inputs. And since this is about moving forward over a period of time, I was interested in what are the staff opportunities for regular input and consultation, I mean, across department groups as opposed to within departments, because obviously you note the EDI and that's a quite new initiative. So I did wonder what other networks you might be developing that ensure that staff, not through the line of management, but across, say, working mothers or newer young people from a local neighbourhood, have to feed in to these ideas around hybrid working and how we move forward.
Yeah, if I excuse me, let me say a few words and then I'll pass to Debbie Morris, and then if I come back to me, Debbie. But I think that this is quite important because we've been doing surveys of staff, but those surveys are based on individual responses and not based on a dialogue between staff of certain identity or staff with certain work patterns or whatever. And we're increasing the period of that so that we're decreasing the period, so that we're doing it monthly now, and we're also looking at how we engage with staff in whatever self-organised groups they're in. Because we have to start with their intrinsic motivation, not from, I don't know, performance-related pay bonus or something to encourage people. People are intrinsically motivated to work in children's or in transport or in other areas. It's a vocation for them, or working in the public sector is a vocation for them. And the issue really for us is how do we, bearing in mind all these different new patterns of work that's emerging, how do we make sure that these new patterns of work aren't driven by staff preference, but the staff preference meets the public need? That's the challenge, I think. Well, Debbie, do you want to mention some of these groups? Because we do have regular conversations with trade unions, but also with staff groups. And I do so annually, and I also do so with the EDI groups every 2 months, I have to say.
Yeah. Hi. So, John O'Rourke and myself, we meet with the unions regularly. We have ongoing dialogue with them. You've already mentioned some of the equality and diversity groups that we've got operating in the borough. We have a Young People's Network, is one of those networks, and we recently have an Expecting Mothers Network as well. So those groups meet together. Outside of that, Amanda Rice, who's the head of equality and diversity, and myself meet with the networks once a month, and we cover corporate matters, so it isn't just about one thing. So we've recently had a BITC audit on a race survey, and we got the results of that, and we met with all of the EDI network people, and we discussed that as we did with the Our Voice survey results. Outside of that, we've been doing lunch and learn sessions on particular topics which anybody from the council can attend. We hold book clubs monthly, and again, that there's sort of corporate-wide discussion on those matters. So the networks are good. They're not just in their own department. We do have quite a lot of corporate activity going on.
And from these, will you be developing any kind of working groups around themes? Because there are support groups, and then there are groups that feed into you around a hybrid policy, or why we haven't got more local staff working for us, even with the recruitment drive. That I'd be interested in that.
I think that is the point of this, really, that we use those groups to feed into our workforce plan. I think if you were to ask us in 2019 about workforce planning, we'd be doing this top down.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's really about bubbling up, really, ideas, but making sure that, look, we are not a cooperative. You know, this council is not a cooperative. We don't sort of ask people how do they want to work and what are they going to be doing. We're a council that's delivering services, but we're doing so with the staff that we've got, mindful of the change of patterns that they have. And some of them actually do want to change not just their work pattern, but their life pattern as a result of the last 2 years. And we've got to be respectful of that, but we're respectful if they want to, you know, people may just want to change the number of days they work, let alone where they work. And so embracing flexible working, but doing so in ways that means that we can safeguard children, that we can deliver services and environment, that we can, all of those things are important, but the workforce plan that we have has got to come from these emergent discussions.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think Barry's right. We have to remember that actually we're local government, we're not a business. We are delivering services, and however flexible we would like to be to our workforce, bottom line is that they're serving the public. And we have to have children's social workers who are here. We have to have people who are collecting the rubbish or whatever. That's what we do. So we have to remember that's got to be fundamental and first, and then our staff have to kind of fit around that rather than us fitting around them.
And also those staff who work in functions, there may be corporate functions or support service functions, they also need to know, the lawyers need to know about the place, the locality. We're not suggesting we could do it cheaper by offshoring it to Hyderabad and having legal advice down the line or overnight. You know, we are local government, so that connection is really central to all of the staff, not just those working on the front line.
Yeah, and I would really welcome what you're saying about ensuring that we have that connectivity and that people connect with place so they understand what the community's feeling about, like, and, you know, how the borough kind of works. And as you say, you can't do that from Hyderabad.
No.
Maxwell.
Thank you for this report. It's really good. I'm just interested in terms of how you measure staff productivity, and has remote working helped or hindered that? And then what is the future of flexible working when it comes to our staff, and is it going to be different for different units? And how have staff been coping with the various changes throughout this period?
This is a sort of PhD question, I'm afraid. How do you manage public sector productivity, and how do you manage it? Actually, I did a lecture at the LSE on how you manage productivity in the public sector, and I used libraries as an example to demonstrate it couldn't be done. It is very, very difficult to measure productivity. In fact, it's very difficult for people to even make judgments about their own productivity. Staff have found that quite difficult. Some people say, I'm much more productive at home, but then I'm atomised and fragmented. I can produce things on my own, but I don't know whether it's good quality or not because no one's been challenging it. Others will say, well, there's major distractions that I have at home, or there's major distractions that I have at work. And it just depends both on the people, where they are in their career, where they are in the team that they work in. An awful lot of very few individuals are employed that we employ to do an individual job. That individual job is generally nested in a team, hosted in a team, which is then within a bigger team. And so it's really about, well, you know, when you have the old response to this, what used to be, if you had 3 people working in the press office and you went to having 4, are they more productive or less productive? Because beforehand they had 2 other people to speak to, and now they've got 3 other people to speak to. And so are they more distracted or less productive? You can only really measure this relative to what it is that you're asking the media team or the press team to do. So productivity is really only measured at the service unit level. It tends to be measured at sector level. So, you know, so if you looked at council's productivity, what you'd say is, what is the resource input and what is the level of output they've got? And are there decreasing or increasing returns to scale if you put more resource in or less resource in? That analysis has never really been done. In other words, what's the most cost-effective local authority? There's what's the authority you could standardise by outputs and look at the outputs of, say child safeguarding. You look at outputs, then you look at inputs. What's the resources deployed? But you can't really put a quality dimension into it. Nordhaus wrote about the cost of light over 300 years and how it improved immensely, but the quality, the thing that had improved most was actually quality, the quality of lighting. People used to use candles. And so you're into, well, how do you measure productivity in public service when a lot of the outputs are not really reducible to the inputs? So I would say that at the moment, we're asking every member of staff to think about their own productivity and where that's best placed, their team productivity and what we're doing in relation to service. And I do think cost effectiveness measures, which I'm afraid aren't prevalent in local government, what you've got is simply cost. You've got cost and outputs. Doesn't really tell you very much. But cost effectiveness measures and productivity measures are those that are likely to come in the next few years. I've been speaking to 2 or 3 other chief executives that are anxious about have we lost productivity or have we gained it? And people, I'm afraid, have no judgment about that at the moment. There's not a established view about productivity. The only area I've seen it in is in the financial services sector. There's an argument that people working remotely, it's really journalists, academics and traders that seem to be the people that can operate at greater levels of productivity when they're working remotely, but not people that require conversation, the creative collision between people and ideas, or stopping silly ideas. It's not just a creative collision doesn't create great ideas, it can actually stop ideas as well. Well, best not to do that. So I think, look, I think this question is a fundamental question for management effectiveness in the public sector, and it's going to be returned to all the time. We don't really know the answer to it, I'm afraid. Although I can turn to the Director of Risk and Assurance, who I'm sure will have a much better answer. No, it doesn't. No. I'll send you something I've written on this subject. So it's very difficult.
Are there any other comments or any other questions? I think really, Barry, one of the most fundamental things about this report is the fact that you're leaving and you've given us really strong foundations on which to improve and transform and modernise. And I would like to say to the committee, the bit I like most about this report is about how we have to double down on everything. You know, we can't just think that Barry's come in, he's, you know, put some oofle dust on something and we're transformed. We always have to evolve. And in this management report, that's what it says. And if you go to paragraph 7, it's exactly that, you know, a workforce plan, looking at multidisciplinary project-based working, and 7.3, vital we continue to listen to the voices and perspectives of the Grenfell bereaved and survivors and to all others affected. I mean, that has to be central to everything we do. And of course we have to invest in staff engagement and development and IT. It's this continual transformation and continual evolution so that we can be the best council, so that we can serve our communities better. And in order to do that as well, we need to continue to realise, you know, the financial benefits and of our strategic alliance with Westminster. So I think it's very, very good that you've laid all those out and that you've incorporated the recommendations of the LGA sponsored corporate peer challenge and the equalities one. And actually, David, from the point of view of your question, if you read what they say on the LGA equalities thing, it says we've really made very good progress, which we should be very pleased about, while still recognising there's still a long way to go. So I would like to thank Barry very much for this report. I think it's really excellent. It's not for us to agree it or disagree it. It's just for us to understand what needs to be done in order to keep the council management and everything up to date so the service that we provide is the best, and to remember that in so doing we are always led by our communities. And therefore I'm asking you just really to note the report, the actions set out, and that we should refer it to the full council for their information. So is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Okay, can we go to the next report, which is A5, which is a little bit, should be a little bit quicker, and it's all about preparations for the council election scheduled for the 5th of May. It's for information, and I'm sure you will be very interested in it as it affects all of your futures. Actually, I'm not going to get you to go through it, Barry, because it's pretty self-explanatory, is what it is. It says on the tin. So, you're all interested parties. Any questions?
Only given that this is May, do we think that having one-way systems, PPE, and a maximum of 4 people in the polling station at a time, do we think that's an overkill?
I think any decision we make now is provisional, really. We've got to be prepared for things, but bluntly we're going to be, you know, I think the only thing we've learned over the last 2 years is that we should be prepared to adapt and change it. And make it really, because the key thing is that elections are secure, got high integrity, and that people are accessible to vote. So we shouldn't do things which minimise that unless there's clear guidance from government and public health that we ought to.
Thank you. Debbie.
So just to say that was put in the report that should we be in COVID restrictions again, just to try and ensure you that those measures are in place. It's not anticipated at the moment that they are in place.
I'm just reading the polling station.
No, we have
just try to ensure you we've thought about that.
Should there be a requirement?
Should.
Oh, should, okay. Sorry, I missed that bit. Key word. Thank you.
David.
With the exception of 1 or 2 polling stations, are there any significant changes compared with last time 4 years ago?
No.
Assume the answer is no, but if you can just say that.
No. That there may be in relation to the counts, but not in relation to the poll.
What's the deadline for someone to register to vote for this election?
Deadline to register vote.
Vote closes on the 14th of April.
That's it.
That's postal vote, but if you just want to vote in general, is there a deadline?
I think it's saying. I think it is the 14th.
Yes, it's the 14th.
Yeah. I think it is the 14th.
14th of April.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
just before Easter.
Stick it in your diary.
Thank you. Any other questions? Nope. Okay, please can we note the report. So paper A6 is the pay policy. So actually, I was going to ask the first question, which is, are there any substantial differences from 2021-22 pay policy?
There's nothing substantial, no.
Okay. Any ones that we should note particularly, or is it really just saying this is the pay policy that we've had and this is the pay policy for the next year and there's not much difference?
There isn't much difference, just one point if I
Great.
may.
Yes, please.
We have to quote the Chief Executive pay multiple. That's risen from 5.2 last year to 5.6 this year. This is the first time that it's been calculated since the removal of performance-related pay. So that's had an impact. Plus also we've trooped in 100 staff, estate services, which has also changed the calculation. So it's just that one point that I wanted to bring to your attention.
That was the pay multiple,
Yes.
but we're still below London.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, and I'm comforted by that. So really what you're saying to us is that the average pay of the staff has reduced and hence the multiple has increased. It's not the fact that we've been overly generous with the Chief Executive's pay package. So, okay, and I thank you for that. The other thing I thought was interesting was to talk about the government guidance on situations whereby we departed from the contract of employment entitlement in the event of redundancy or early settlement. And I just wonder, what's the process of vetting that then, in terms of if we decide not to give a contractual entitlement, and whether or not there's a sort of informal calculation of what multiples we would use in that event?
So we have a set formula of what multiples we use, and as a borough generally we never detract from those.
But that's beyond the contractual entitlement, which is I think the point that's been raised in here.
So we don't...
We have a policy on it, but it's not contractually entitlement.
So it is a contractual entitlement, and it's very rare we would ever go above the contractual entitlement that somebody was due.
Right. Okay, because obviously the reference here was departing from that contractual entitlement. So even though we have a contractual entitlement, we may sometimes vary that. Then is that really what I'm understanding under this paragraph 3.6 so, and 3.8?
So, I'll hand over to Mark. He might be able to explain it a bit better if I may.
Thank you. Oh, sorry.
There we go. That's on. Okay. So the government guidance was just trying to put in place some extra measures to reflect the council's duties under, or not just this council, all local authorities' responsibilities under the best value duty. Now, I think the view that went back to government from the LGA and individual authorities that responded was that individual local authorities are already doing that anyway. So any payments that require a settlement, any exits require a settlement over and above a standard redundancy package, are signed off by the local monitoring officer, have section 151 officer or delegated person involved, as well as the director of HR. So it's really just asking us to do what most authorities consider they're doing anyway.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Okay, can we please approve the council's pay policy for 2022 to 3 as set out in the appendix? Yep, thank you. And now we come on to adoptions of a members' allowance scheme for next year, and I believe in this we're just saying that we're going to roll the current one, we're not going to uplift it. Is that all agreed? Any questions? Yep. David, you need to turn your machine on.
I can't see where it is, but I think there's a reference to those people who want to claim dependents' carers allowances not being able to do it if they are, this is Constitution Part 2, Section 3, for going along to school meetings where they're governors. But if they've been co-opted or recommended by the school, so by the council, why is that not permitted? Or maybe I've got that.
Could you tell us which section you're looking at?
Sorry, I read it and I can't remember earlier.
So what are you asking? You're asking why if the council co-opts people into schools,
recommends you to a school, why are you not allowed to have, for example, dependent carers allowances because you have been recommended by the council to be a school governor?
Barry?
There are many things that councillors can be nominated to on behalf of the, to. The question is whether they're doing so on behalf of the council, representing the council, is a completely separate matter. And then, of course, there's the issue of the obligation. So, for example, there's questions about attendance at some meetings don't count for the 6-month rule because people are simply attending a meeting of another body to which they've been nominated by the council, but they're not actually representing the council. So it may be that this issue is caught up in that part of the regulation in relation to this. But we'll look at the regulatory arrangement, because it could be statutory regs about this that say the council can only do up to a point, otherwise we'll be nominating people to all manner of things.
Sorry, Barry, it's 8.02 on page 28, and it says, party political conferences, I get that. College and school governing bodies, I don't get that. Council surgeries, I get that. And political group meetings, I get that. It's just college and school governing bodies on the on page 29, 8.02b.
I think we do sort of intuitively think this is probably in regulation. We wouldn't have made this up, but we will check whether it is regulation and come back to the whole committee on that.
Thank you, that would be very helpful. But could we please accept the adoption of the members' allowance scheme? Yes, all agreed? Thank you very much. So the next paper is paper A8, and it's proposed amendments to contract regulations. So, want to go?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee. So very briefly, we set out in paragraph 3.3 the main changes being proposed to the contract regulations since we last came to the committee in September 2020 to make sure, obviously, we've got a really good, robust framework in place for officers to follow when looking to let contracts, ensuring that we're complying with the relevant regulations and legislation, making sure the governance arrangements internally are being followed, and that record keeping is appropriate wherever contracts are being let. And in the recommendations, particularly in 2.1.3, we're recognising the importance of ensuring member engagement at the early stages of procurement, very much around the procurement strategy, when we're looking at how we go to market to procure a contract or service. It's really important that officers, particularly when there are key decisions involved, are engaging appropriate members at that stage, rather than just at contract award when effectively there's a decision either to award a contract or not.
Thank you. Monica.
Just a quick question, and apologies if I didn't see it in the detail here, but since we are now going to co-design and co-production, that is involving currently residents in procurement and in actually deciding. the award of a contract. Was that looked into, and did that bring about any changes to any of the process or requirements?
So that's really helpful, Councillor. So what we want to make sure is obviously the procurement strategy, again, is the key document where that will be flagged up, where that's going to take place. It's important that members see that to that point. My procurement team are carrying out training for residents who are on evaluation panels, who are involved in setting up specifications for contracts. And we're very clear at each stage what the resident involvement is in the process to ensure that they're fully aware and engaged, but also we're being appropriate in terms of what the regulations allow us to do.
Could I just say that this is actually going on at the moment with no training, and I did raise this and was a surprise. So there may be this idea that's come from earlier papers about more cross-departmental working, but I can assure you that there's a group of untrained residents at this time with one officer taking a decision. I'm not saying that it's not being appropriately done, but I was surprised that there wasn't more training and or involvement of procurement officers actually on the panel. But I think we can understand why, because we've been trying to move forward with our commitment to participation. But I would strongly, from the last 2 years that I've been working on this, say that you might want to look at policy to ensure that this is compliant.
So I'm happy, Chair, to pick up with the Councillor on the particular issue and to make sure that's addressed, but we will make sure, again, communicating to officers the importance of making sure that residents are properly trained and briefed in carrying out these exercises with officers, and it's the officers who are responsible for putting together the decision papers that are then either agreed by officers or by members. So just being clear that that's the... Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, that's really helpful, Monica. Anyone else got anything to say? No? Could we please accept the recommendations in paragraph 2? Is that agreed? Thank you very much. And that's it, I think, from this Administration Committee. Thank you all for coming, and I look forward to seeing you next time.